Hello, I am the Dark Fane. Welcome back to Confessions of a First-Time Dungeon Master. As always, if you missed the last session, I'll put a link to it up in the corner over here. You can go back, catch up on what you missed, come back here and find out what happened next. We're now on session 34. This one's kind of a long one, so buckle up and let's get started. Alright, so for this session, basically what I prepped was the maze around St. Kane's Tower, and it's like the most, I think, that I've prepared for a kind of dungeon crawl-esque session, and it's the most like prepared I've ever felt, and also like the least prepared I've ever felt, just because so much went into it. So I'm going to go over the kind of properties of this whole maze and tower and kind of how it works, and then go through kind of what happened to the players. So, to start off in this maze, there is a kind of magic scrambling aura that is emitting from this tower to encompass the entirety of this maze. And so the properties that I decided on depend very much upon like your proximity to the tower, and it gets stronger the closer you get. So from 600 to 800 feet away, that spells work as normal. Once you get between 400 and 600 feet away, that's when magic starts to get affected. So the duration of spells is reduced by half. So things that last an hour last 30 minutes, things that last a minute last 30 seconds, etc. The range, meaning like the range of an aura or the range that you can cast an attack spell, is reduced by 10 feet. And spellcasters must roll a d20 plus their spellcasting modifier to beat a DC of 10. On a failure, the damage or heal or effect is reduced by 1 dice. So if it deals 2d6 damage, it is reduced by 1d6. If it's a d4 healing, it's reduced by a d4 that they roll after and subtract the amount. Then from 200 to 400 feet away, same thing, duration is reduced by half. The range is now reduced by 30 feet. And the way the range reduction works is that if, say, you have a spell that has a range of 30 feet and it's reduced by 30, it essentially becomes either a touch spell or just an effect that only centers really on yourself. And then the DC goes up to 13 for spellcasters in order to roll full damage or full heal, etc. They also have a disadvantage on concentration checks. 100 to 200 feet away, duration is halved, range is reduced by 60, and the DC goes up to 15. Continued disadvantage on concentration. 100 to 200 feet away now, duration of spells is still reduced to half. Range is reduced now by 100 feet, so most spells really can only operate in close combat. And the DC, spellcasters must roll a d20 plus their spellcasting ability modifier, and they have to beat a 17. So in most cases, if they have like a +4, +5, they have to get like a 13, 12, 13, 14 or higher. And the spell, if they fail, then actually the spell fails to cast and they lose that spell slot. So, and also continued disadvantage on concentration checks. So this kind of magic scrambling aura or mist is kind of a property of the mist, I guess you could say. It does also extend to magical abilities that are ongoing. Say if you cast a buff on yourself and then entered into this range, it would effectively be halved or be stopped prematurely. It also affects magical abilities like Channel Divinity or Wild Shape. So luckily, players didn't really run into that too much, since once they realized that spellcasting really is quite limited here, they try to conserve their resources. And then there are also different possible sort of effects kind of based on the spell. So like for teleportation, if you teleport into this aura, there's a percentage chance that either the distance is reduced or your location is offset by a certain amount. I think there's like a 10% chance that the teleport will put them into an object, and then the spell fails. Kind of like with Dimension Door, if you teleport into a space that's already occupied by something else, you'll take damage and the spell fails. Or other effects could be that the spell targets one person less than is dictated by the spell, or it can target a random target, someone random other than the one intended, and it can possibly include allies. Again, these didn't come up really, luckily, but those were, I think, effects that I needed to take into account since there are so many different spells, and they should be affected in a way kind of in accordance to whatever effect they have. Oh, okay, so another property of this kind of maze dungeon crawl is the mist. So the magic scrambling aura is a little bit separate from that, and the mist itself has kind of mind-altering properties. Again, themes of like insanity and madness kind of coming into play. So kind of on my own discretion, kind of at every little checkpoint or so, I basically, depending on how many party members they have, I would roll a dice appropriate. So they had 10 members to start with, so I'd roll a d10, assign each of them a number, and determining who I rolled, that person would make a random melee attack against a target next to it. This is kind of like the effect of the Crown of Madness spell, and that's been kind of woven into the mist. So they occasionally kind of take a swipe at each other, kind of necessitating that they spread out a little bit, but also kind of risking it a little in that they do need to travel together, and it's quite easy to potentially lose someone in the mist. I did have a thing where within 100 feet of the tower, the mist would change and it would become more of like a confusion effect, but I kind of did away with that. And then there was also the matter of if they stayed too long in the mist, because it is very much kind of a duration-based effect, or if like you're not in control of your own mind, there's nothing to fight against kind of the effect and it will overtake you sooner. Basically, if they drop to 0 hit points or become incapacitated or stunned or something, there will be an effect. Or if they decide to take a short rest, then there will also be consequences to that as well. So they can do it. It's just kind of a toss-up. Luckily, they didn't take a short rest, but basically, if they decide to take a short rest, they have to make a DC 15 Wisdom saving throw. And on a failure, they have a short-term madness, which is rolled on the madness table. And that can be kind of dangerous because some of those madnesses cause you to become stunned or incapacitated or something, and that will actually start to stack on, and you might have to continually roll madnesses the longer you are incapacitated. So that could have been quite scary. If a creature becomes incapacitated, like stunned, paralyzed, unconscious, for 1 round or more, they have to make the same wisdom save or be stricken with the short-term madness. And so this one is a quite brutal, I think, rule, is if a creature drops to 0 hit points, so ignore the unconscious of the previous. That would be more like if they fell asleep. But if a creature drops to 0 hit points, the mist will actually keep their body alive, so they won't necessarily need to make death saves. But if they aren't revived within a round, then the mist will actually bring them back to life, but they will basically be overcome with insanity, and they'll become like one of the mindless drones that inhabit the mist. More on that later. If they are revived in time, and I was a little lenient with this, but only 1 person went down, they have to make a DC 16 Wisdom saving throw. On a failure, they are stricken then with a long-term madness, and some of those can have some really debilitating effects, and it's a good thing that they have a cleric with them who's a bit more powerful and can handle some of these dicier status effects. But anyway, so those are the 2 main effects, and so now comes to all of the different hazards and potential encounters in here. I originally had it where I was rolling on a table to see kind of the random encounter, but it kind of ended up that each encounter happened like once, which was kind of nice. So basically the way that I ran this was they have to move a total of 800 feet to the tower. It's technically more with like the different windings, but I just kind of shorthand did it in like 8 increments, for example. So in each increment I gave them kind of a different skill challenge or a different scenario that they would have to try and circumvent. I guess I'll kind of list some of those out and then just go through them really quickly. So some of the possible hazards of this mist are kind of the creatures or the people in it. So within this mist and this maze, a lot of the inhabitants, I guess, are Grimknife operatives or Wolishk members of the Wolishk war bands who had originally like maybe tried to storm the tower or basically just got caught in there or had fallen to 0 hit points in there basically and had their minds turned. So there are many rogues, clerics, mages, like assassins basically in the mist, or like large orcish warriors, hobgoblins, kind of like that. So any of a number of those that they could possibly encounter as they do kind of patrol the mazes and they kind of attack anything that they see. And even though they are kind of driven insane, they still do maintain a lot of their like class and racial abilities. So they'll still get like rage or sneak attack or spells, stuff like that. And then another thing possible is that there are some of these humanoids, these either Grimknives or Scanthan warriors, who have either been there too long or have been corrupted in some way. And so if you're familiar with Dark Souls, I remember it vividly in Dark Souls 3, the Pus of Man, that kind of undead that kind of erupts into this giant kind of ooze, worm, snake monster. That's basically what these things are. And I changed it a little bit so that they're like a little bit acidic too, and that they kind of patrol the surface level of the maze, since the maze kind of goes underground. And there are still spokes that are ground level. And that's kind of why that part is also just as dangerous as trying to wind through a maze. And then there's a lot, I know. Another hazard is that flying through the air, there are also gargoyle-like sentries. They kind of have 4 faces, 1 in the front and back, and 2 on the sides that kind of swivel. Each one with like a different like expression of agony, and they have this purple light that emits from like their eyes and nostrils and ears and mouth. And they fly around and search for any hostiles or any potential threats, either coming through the air or coming through the maze. It's possible that one of them might fly overhead and come down and take a look. Other potential weird things in the maze is that the maze does move around, and it does kind of change its course, and there can be illusory walls and stuff like that, very Dark Souls. And then there can also be like concentrated forms of this mist, kind of, which is kind of like a maddening darkness. They need to pass on a wisdom saving throw, DC 15, otherwise obtain a short-term madness, which again can start to trigger a lot of the mist's effects, so it's something you do not want. So now I have listed all of the hazards and potential encounters. I did try to do this in like a bit more of a shorthand way, since I didn't want this to be like a huge, enormous dungeon crawl with like 6 different maps and like 8 different encounters, all of which kind of involve a big thing. So I kind of tried to make it a bit more skill challenge-esque. So let's start with what they did. So we didn't start the session, I guess, in the maze. So basically, in the morning when they woke up, they returned to the headmistress's tower and got all of their resources and supplies and signed the contract. And then once they were prepared, they were teleported basically to an abandoned mine kind of south of the Drexel Mountains, which was a couple miles out from the beginning of the maze. So there they met kind of the 5 agents who would be helping them. There's a human wizard named Nonaria Kwai. She kind of has dark skin, like dark kind of dreads pulled back, tattoos kind of down the center of her face, down like to her chin, wearing kind of the standard black and silver robes of the Grim Knives. There's a half-elf cleric named Verosia, who's a bit kind of like Brienne of Tarth, but instead her armor is like black and silver and emblazoned with the daggers of Zenaria. And then there are 3 rogues. I kind of use just generic assassin stats for them, who don't speak because they have had their tongues cut out in their vow of silence to, I believe, Saint Rinsha Kiafel, who is like the who is a saint under Zenaria and is known to kind of like take a vow of silence in order to keep their organization's secrets. So this group going to guide them through the maze. It's kind of spoken, unspoken that the 5 of them are prepared to kind of sacrifice themselves for the group in order to get them to the tower. They do mention that there are like a couple different ways that they could approach this. One, they could try to skip some of the maze by teleporting in like partway into the maze, but again, some iffiness with the magic, or they could just start at the outside and work their way in, which is what Noradia and Verosia have done before. They decide on the latter, and so without much other prep, they head out, stealthing a little bit just to make sure they're not caught out in the open by anything from Zinkane's tower, and then they reach the maze. I would say in the maze, things are more concentrated towards the center or the middle of the maze. So on the outside, their first skill check from 800 to 700 feet is simply a stealth check. And here, since spells work, Alhiri has cast Pass Without Trace up, so they all roll pretty good stealth. Like over 20s and 30s, I think. And are able to kind of pass through the maze quietly and stealthily and not encounter anything, which is great. From 700 to 600 feet, I say that Naradia, who is kind of guiding them, leads them down a turn, and then there's abruptly a dead end, which was not there the last time. So this one I asked for some investigation and some maybe survival, I think just investigation checks. And eventually Naradia, I think, discovers that there is actually an illusory wall and that they're able to kind of pass through it onto another section of the maze beyond. So that's not too bad. From 600 to 500 feet, then they come across a cloud of this concentrated mist, this like dark void that's just kind of spread out across the entire pathway in front of them. Basil attempts like a detect magic, but now spell ranges are shortened, so he has to move quite a bit closer to determine that it has enchantment magic on it, which is the mind-altering type. And so eventually they get past it because he casts Dispel magic on it, but they're able to get through it just fine. But that is 1 3rd level spell expended. Okay, so now 500 to 400 is where things get more combat-y. They gotta start fighting their way through. So as they're kind of moving down like a T intersection, basically, as they draw level with this T, daggers kind of fly out from either from the side and from behind them, striking Valkyrie with a pretty significant hit with poison damage and sneak attack. I also forgot that as rogues, they have assassinate, or as these are assassins kind of in the stat block, I could show you here. I did kind of alter it a little bit, but for the most part, vanilla. They do get a critical hit on any creature that is surprised / or hasn't gone in the initiative turn order yet. I can't remember. But so she actually took like 38 or something like damage, 50 damage or something like that. And that actually should have been doubled. But I forgot about it for her, so I let it slide. She was actually pretty hurt from that. And then, but one of the rogues in the back was caught unawares and pretty much knocked unconscious / died on the spot. Because that would have been like 78 damage to him or something. So, now, so there are 2 Grimknife rogues or assassins on them. Nerdadia does kind of urge them that they do need to continue. And here's kind of where I see the repeating pattern with my party of they treat every combat, like possible encounter, as combat. They don't, I feel like they don't really consider like stopping them or like somehow halting them and then running away or anything like that, which is not bad, but also, I mean, it can make you expend a lot of your HP and a lot of your resources when it might not have to. But anyways, we roll initiative. I'm hoping, like, I tried to make these combats that I knew could happen a little bit quicker by only having like 1 or 2 enemies, but a bit like glass cannons, they can do quite a lot, but it should be pretty fast for 10 of them or however many to take them down. So roll combat, eventually they do beat the crap out of the rogues, taking some damage, but are relatively okay. Valkyrie does require some healing. And then they move on. So from 400 to 300 feet now, I have them roll another stealth check as Nerdadia kind of hears something above them and motions for everyone to be quiet and to hide as best they can. This time, I think, without Pass Without a Trace, but they all still roll decent stealth as a group. And this time, their purple glow kind of flies down from above, and this giant kind of gargoyle-esque creature, one of the sentries, lands on the kind of the top of the tunnel wall to their left and kind of paces around a bit, kind of searching for them. I kind of tried to draw it out a little bit to make them maybe a little tense to see if it would actually spot them or jump down. I don't know if I succeeded, but eventually they hear it's like wing beats start again. It's this heavy and then the purple light eventually fades as it takes off and flies away. So they were able to kind of avoid that, which is good because that thing can be pretty nasty. Then from 300 to 200 feet, I wanted to give them a bit of a different opportunity where they're not like jumped in combat. So at a different T section where I was envisioning it kind of like where they're here and the person is kind of walking this way. I mentioned that they hear some very heavy kind of clinking footsteps, probably some heavily armored creature coming down the path in front of them. And so here, I mean, they could either try to stealth, wait for it to go, or they could, lure it over and then jump it, set up an ambush. They do decide to kind of hide where they are, get in position, set up an ambush. So I have them roll a stealth check. Some of them didn't roll too great, so kind of going off of the perception of this is a hobgoblin warlord, essentially. Put the stats up here. So some of them didn't get a surprise round, but most of them did. The hobgoblin kind of came around the corner, and they all kind of unleashed their attacks for the most part, I think it did get a couple swings in, but for the most part, they were able to dispatch it pretty easily, luckily. And then the last leg, from 200 to 100, they kind of move down another corridor, and kind of from the mist in front of them, this bolt of lightning just jets down and strikes pretty much all of them, because they're all in a line, because the tunnels are pretty narrow. So there is like a mage up ahead, casts lightning bolts. It does 31 damage to some of them make their saves, so it's halved to 15. Still a good chunk of damage. Yeah, for this one, there was just the one mage. And so for this one, it felt like there was kind of a rush, or from my perspective, there was kind of a rush to kill, I think it was a him, before it got to cast again, because it has like those AoE spells that can do a lot of damage to a lot of people. It did manage to get like a thunder wave off. I think it knocked Tyrell unconscious once, but they were able to dispatch him quite quickly. And also with the enemies that they have been killing, they've noticed that quite quickly, like within a round or two, the enemy actually starts to move again and starts to actually like raise up off of the ground as it kind of reanimates. So with Tyrell, they do revive him in a round in time, but he does fail his wisdom save, so he does get a long-term madness. He gets the one where like he's overcome with tremors and shakes, and so he has disadvantage on ability checks, attack rolls, and I think concentration, which sucks. But after they kill this mage, Verosia takes some time to kind of heal everyone, casts Greater Restoration on Tyrell, so his madness is not an issue, and then they start their last stretch to the tower. So, if you've been following, you can maybe guess what final encounter is waiting for them. But at the entrance to the tower, that they're going for, which is like this sewer grate, this kind of culvert that is a maybe secretive way into the tower, there is kind of a humanoid just like sitting there, kind of on all fours, kind of like a wolf would be, like waiting or crouched waiting for something. And they all kind of stop. Neradia and Verosia look at each other, and they're just like, oh shit, if this is what we think it is, this is gonna suck. They discuss briefly on whether they should fight this thing or get in the tower somehow and seal it off, or it's not very clear what their plan is, but eventually they'll decide to approach. And then when they get within like 30 feet of it, that's when it kind of erupts into this like large ooze, snake-like creature. It's like armed, distending. And everyone rolls initiative, and that's where we end the session. So I'll be curious to see how they want to approach this. It's more because technically, they've had like 3 combat rounds already, but they were pretty short, but pretty hard hitting, I think. So, and they know that they can't stay like outside in this maze. So they're kind of discussing what the allies should do, and like how to deal with this creature, like without fighting it. I'm not sure how they're gonna do that. Their allies might have some tricks up their sleeves, but we will see what happens. But that is like one major part of this done. It was probably one of the dungeon crawls that I'm more proud of, because I feel like it was very unique and I don't think it felt like super slow, because there were so many different encounters or different things that they kind of had to do, hopefully. But yeah, so now I've got to design like 1.5 more dungeon crawls, like 2 maybe, because I gotta go through sewers and then the tower, and there's a lot now. But I'm happy that this went well at least. So, but those will be in the future episodes. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was an interesting kind of look into how I designed this maze dungeon crawl. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for notifications when I put out new videos. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!